Hi, welcome back to Cybersecurity for Everyone. I'm Dr. Charles Harry. In our last module, we talked about the threat actors and their motivations. And in this module, I want us to actually talk about what hacking is. It's one of these terms that is often thrown around very loosely in popular culture, but is really a very interesting process. So that's what I want to try to cover in this section. So what is hacking? Well, in the popular culture, we have this sense that hacking is done by a lone actor. And in our last section, we found out that that's really not the case. There are lots of different groups with different motivations. But more importantly, there's this perception that there's always this quick facilitation of access, even to the most sensitive of networks. A good example of this would be the movie Hackers from 1995, which actually depicts hackers flying through cyberspace. It seems a little ludicrous, but that was certainly the perception 20 years ago. There's almost always this perception that there's universal success, that if the hackers just have a few minutes or a couple hours to work on it, they can bring down all the traffic lights in a city or take down an electrical power grid. Well, is that really the case? And that's what I want to explore in this section. But the reality of hacking is really quite different. It's different than what we see in popular culture. So it's much more complicated. And in fact, the harder the hack is, the more sensitive the network that you're trying to gain access to, it likely takes more time, resources, and skill. So there's a range of efforts, some of which really are quite trivial or quite easy to pull off, and others that are much more complicated. So for example, if I want to gain access to, let's say, the web page of your local dentist, that might be a lot easier to access than, let's say, the defense network in the Pentagon. Fundamentally, hacking is a collection of efforts that culminate in achieving a particular end goal. And that's a key thing to take away here, is that hacking is a process. It is a collection of efforts. It is not any single effort. It is a collection of efforts. So what are some examples of these types of hacking activities? Well, they include things like investigating your target's webpage for information. Well, that doesn't necessarily seem like that's a hacking activity, but it's absolutely fundamental. Things like who works at the company? What are the different parts of the organization? What are their emails? These are all examples of hacking activity. The preparation of what we would call a lure file. You're trying to entice someone to actually click on a particular file, like a Word document or a PDF document, that actually may hide in it malicious code. There's a certain amount of effort that's required to make a file that's compelling enough for someone to actually open. So there's a little bit of psychology involved. Maybe identifying a useful vulnerability in a program that's running on a particular system. That might be an example of hacking activity. Or being on the device, how do I actually increase my user permissions so that I'm able to actually install the programs that I want? Or even enabling my malware, my bad software, to communicate with other devices under my control. These are all examples of hacking activity, and they fall into very specific groups that we're going to talk about in a second. So we should think of hacking as a collection of activities moving towards an objective. Activities that are conducted by a specific threat actor are all focused on achieving some sort of objective. Now, this is a really important point. Hackers are not hacking just for the sake of it. They're trying to achieve something, either the acquisition of data or potentially to disrupt your activities. These activities that a hacker or threat actor engages in can be grouped together in a series of descriptive categories. Those categories are brought together into what we call hacking. Linking those efforts together forms this process. So if hacking is a process, we might be able to leverage what are known as frameworks to think and group these activities together in a coherent framework. Several of these hacking frameworks exist in the world today. Two of the more popular hacking frameworks include the Lockheed Martin Kill Chain and the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We'll talk about both of these frameworks in this course. Both of the approaches are useful in trying to categorize groupings of activities that are all part of this broader hacking process. So let's talk about the general process of hacking at a very, very high level. And in this particular case, we're going to lay out the Lockheed Martin Kill Chain. And you'll notice that this particular framework consists of several different groupings of activities that we're going to explore in this module. The first is reconnaissance, and this is really an exploration of your target and includes a lot of different activities that are not necessarily technical. They can include things like general web research on the organization that you're trying to go after. After reconnaissance is the concept of weaponization, where after I've gathered as much information as I possibly can, usually technical information, but also including organizational and social information, I want to be able to identify vulnerabilities in your network, and I'm going to come up with an exploit that allows me to take advantage of one of those vulnerabilities. After weaponization comes delivery. I need to actually deliver that particular weaponized exploit to your network. And there's lots of different techniques I can use. Exploitation. Once I've actually delivered the weapon to the target and the person clicks on the link or they do some other sort of activity, then I'm actually exploiting your device. Once I'm on your device, I actually want to install my malicious program. And once I've installed my malicious program, I want to make sure that I can command and control that particular piece of malware. Once I've done that, then I'm going to take specific actions on that particular target. Things like stealing information or potentially disrupting that particular computer device, or even start the process all over again and look to do reconnaissance. Now I'm inside your network, but to look for other potential targets that I can swim to. So as you can see, hacking is a process of activities, and each one of these groupings of activities are extremely detailed. So what are some of the takeaways? Well, in popular culture, we incorrectly think about hacking as being done by a lone genius hacker, and it's a specific set of activities that very quickly allow them access into even the most sensitive networks. But the truth is that it's a series of activities that are linked together. And so those efforts strung together become a process of hacking. And two very common hacking frameworks include the Lockheed Martin Kill Chain and the MITRE ATT&CK framework. In our next episode, we're going to talk about the very first grouping of activity, reconnaissance. I hope to see you next time.